good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jolene Mujica. I am the head of trends and tours here at WindowsWear. Welcome to our WindowsWear Live Tuesday edition. Today, we're tackling Pride. So this is our talk on LGBTQ representation in the retail world and brands that are celebrating Pride for Pride Month this June as we end up the month. Let's take a look at a month that was rife with a lot of revolution and a lot of celebration. So it was a very busy month. As always, this is meant to be a discussion, so if you have any questions, please feel free to put those questions in the chat feature on Zoom, in our Instagram comments, or our Facebook comment sections as well. We can address those at the end of the chat. If you worked on any of these projects, also please feel free to join in. So, Pride 2020. So, what's interesting is Pride looked very different this year than it has in years past. Obviously, we in the United States, anyway, are currently in the sort of second wave of a COVID pandemic. So, Pride, which is generally met with huge celebration and parades and group events and concerts, was a little less crowded, literally this year. And however, though, for me, it was a lot more louder than ever in a different way, right? If you looked in your emails, right, there was an inundation of emails and marketing and celebration and platforms and Zoom conferences and all kinds of like educational tools that were at your disposal digitally. So it sort of just shifted and realigned in a really smart way. And, the LGBTQ community has had major strides for inclusivity in industries like entertainment and fashion and beauty. And we're starting to see the days of sort of performative allyship are over. And we're learning through current movements and current topical things that are happening in the United States, particularly in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? That posting a pretty picture on Instagram, a black square, or a picture of a rainbow isn't enough, right? This is a moment that calls for explicit commitments from brands, and consumers really do want to see the receipts, and they're holding brands accountable. So it's a beautiful thing to see. So in honor of Pride Month, let's take a look at different offerings from brands that are offering genuine financial support with pledges of moving the needle forward for LGBTQ representation and communities. Let's start with some representation. What are we seeing lately or this past year at whole? One of the biggest events, it's called Fashion's Night, biggest night, right? Fashion prom. And every year it is a parade of this sort of extravagant, beautiful design worn in honor of the Met Gala, which is the largest fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum's Costume Institute. And this past year, the theme was Camp, Notes on Fashion. And I said this when we talked last week about the color pink and how pink was sort of co-opted by queer people, but no one can really agree on what the aesthetic sensibility of camp means. But everyone could absolutely agree on one thing, that camp was pink and camp is inherently queer, right? So Camp Notes on Fashion was a nod to Susan Sontag's famous essay, which essentially describes camp as this love of the unnatural, of artifice, exaggeration, and extravagance. And these are all qualifiers that the LGBTQ community have historically been persecuted for. And camp is a celebration of that, right? So this year, not only did we see a pink carpet, but we saw a slew of queer folks coming out wearing LGBTQ designers and giving a nod and an homage to their history and their relevance in the community of camp, right? And unlike previous years, like the predecessors to the Met Gala, queerness was the focal point of camp this year, as opposed to just, highlighting a designer or highlighting, one element. It was predominant through the entire exhibit, and that boiled down to the guest list as well. So here we see a great number of members of the LGBTQ community. And when I think of queer culture, like a lot of the sort of stalwarts of that come from camp, right? Like this idea of camp, I think of John Waters and Liberace and Elton John and RuPaul and Lady Gaga and Bob Mackie, right? They were all sort of purveyors of this culture of camp. And so this year's Met Gala theme really showcased that in a really, really fun way, right? From Billy Porter walking down as a being escorted by a bunch of beautiful men, to Cara Delevingne wearing the famous ubiquitous pride rainbow flag, to Janelle Monáe and Lena Waithe and Michael Urie giving this idea on non-binary and Victor Victoria kind of fantasy, right? Like it was all there, and it was all really important, right? Because the Met Gala, like I said, in traditionally isn't necessarily a queer space, but it definitely was with this theme, both in the content that was being shared in the archival pieces, as well as the guests and the designers being featured. By the way, my favorite piece in this, not just because it was sort of understated, was Lena Waithe's suit, which looks like it's pinstripes, but those pinstripes are actually lyrics to very big pop culture phenomenon like queer anthems. So I'm coming out and I will survive. So it's lining the sort of, again, making a statement within a statement. Pushing on, then we have some LGBTQ led brands. So it's a fine line, right, between being a brand that is considered LGBTQ friendly and then led at the helm of their mission statement of who they are, of what they do as a brand. And these are just a couple of examples. There are hundreds of them out there. And, again, consumers want to put their money where they feel the brand's values are. So if they identify with this, they're going to be a lot more apt to spend money there, right? So we've got David and Philippe Blonde, who regularly create these beautiful, extravagant, I would say campy looks for musicians, right? We've seen them create looks for Lady Gaga and Beyonce and Nicki Minaj. Marc Jacobs has always celebrated and supported and accepted members of the LGBTQ community, and it's always been at the core of his brand, as both him personally as an artist and the brand at large, whether it's using fashion to express identity or pledging for charitable donations. And for Pride this year, Marc Jacobs Beauty donated $10,000 to Le Refuge, a French organization that supports LGBTQ youth, and SAGE, which is an organization that helps older members of the LGBTQ community. And then we have Chromat. Chromat was founded in 2010 by Becca McCarran-Tran, and it's always exciting for me to witness inclusive runways and campaigns coincide with a retail presence, right? Chromat's ethos has always been about making sports and swimwear more size inclusive and gender inclusive in that space. And proceeds from their Pride collection go to the GLSEN, which supports its advocacy for transgender inclusion in high school athletics. So again, tying in the core of who they are as a sportswear brand with organizations that align with their values. Then we have a great example of drag representation, and let's be honest, like drag queens and queer people have pretty much like invented so much of modern day pop culture. If you've ever found yourself or a friend or someone saying the term Yas Queen, right, that is derivative and an appropriation of drag culture, right? From popular slang, it's found its way into the mainstream, right? And this was a great example of, this was the first sort of peek that we got into this world with Paris is Burning, right? This very famous documentary about ballroom culture and ballroom elements like voguing, right? And we've seen this explosion into the mainstream, right? Drag culture went from being this small niche market to a huge business. And as drag culture goes mainstream, queer artists get to reap the benefits of this, right? They've been able to create this profitable and sustainable ecosystem that really didn't exist anywhere near on this scale even a decade ago, right? Particularly in the beauty sector, right? If you've heard of contouring and baking and highlighting, right? The drag community has long been this wellspring for makeup trends, and drag queens are beauty leaders and influencers in their own right. And we're starting to see that traditional brands are sort of doing shooting their laser focus to this, right? We call this dragvertising, right? This idea that drag queens are rising to commercial influence and are being seen as prominent members of the entertainment industry, right? We're pushing forward, and it's a really fun thing to see that traditional advertisers and brands are now using drag culture to sell their products, right? From MAC featuring RuPaul and their Viva Glam campaign to kimchi being featured for Lush Cosmetics, right? We've got Shea Coulee and Alexis for Fossil, right? So all of these queens sort of taking up, quote unquote, the space that generally belonged to cisgendered men and women, and sort of assuming these roles as brand ambassadors in an unexpected way. It's really, really smart and really fun. So on Friday, just a little quick piece of history for those that don't remember. On Friday, June 26, 2015, this was a long sought victory for the gay rights movement. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution guarantees the right to same-sex marriage. Now, on that same day, the hashtag #LoveWins was used over 4 million times on Twitter in less than a 12-hour span, right? And at this point, brands basically sprung into action, right? Being on the right side of history is something we all want to say that we are participating in. And of course, brands saw this as an opportunity to cast a nice wide net, right? So here we see Kleinfeld with their perfect timing campaign of same-sex marriage, Levi jeans up top with their just married, right? Their classic denim, and Kate Spade showing their two of a kind campaign that came out in direct correlation to the same-sex marriage ruling of the Supreme Court. So politics, I mean, and just like any other artistry or industry, right? Fashion is completely indicative and is a telltale of what is happening in the world at large. When there is unrest, when there is bias, when there are victories, right? It's a great time to celebrate. It's a great time to raise awareness and at the end of the day, turn a profit off of these things, right? So it's important that they are a part of the conversation, as you know, fashion's a $1 trillion industry. So let's move on. So the New York Public Library commemorating the Stonewall riots with their Love and Resistance exhibition. So for those not familiar, Stonewall was the birthplace of the modern gay rights movement, right? The Stonewall Uprising began in June 1969 when the police raided the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, and LGBT patrons basically stood up for their rights, and it was the moment, one of the very many moments in which a spark in a series of riots which led to this huge movement, right? This idea of throwing the first brick comes from the Stonewall revolution. And this was a moment that sort of like shocked the consciousness of the world, right? Because we had considered ourselves more or less very progressive, and we weren't yet. So it was really important to see that, you know, sometimes using confrontation as a way for reform is not as unprecedented as it seems. I mean, given the current climate right now, using confrontation to push reform sounds very familiar to us, right? If you're familiar with what was happening a couple of weeks ago with the Black Lives Matter protests, right? So it works, right? And it's the power of the people. And this was a really beautiful exhibit that highlighted exactly that, these critical moments before, during, and after Stonewall. This was a free exhibition that was open to the public, and it took an intimate look at this massive transformation in the queer culture, right? And because 2019 was the 50th year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and World Pride was celebrated in New York City, it was a massive deal, and it was very, very beautiful to see. I saw this exhibition, and I think the archivists did a really beautiful job of showing, documents and photographs and all of this really beautiful pioneering material that were used by activists. So that brings us to retail, right? So that's like sort of the larger scope, but let's hone in on retail and this idea of the rainbow dollar, right? The LGBTQ market has basically expanded to this total buying power of more than $1 trillion, right? And rainbow retail has become a norm and not an exception, right? It used to be, that dipping your toes into the realm of politics or social justice or equal rights for women or LGBTQ people were controversial, right? But these have become these watershed moments, and it's the death of corporate social apathy, and I'm absolutely here for it, right? Now, 78% of the LGBTQ community members say that they are inclined to support companies that market to and support queer people. So beyond wanting to do good, right, brands are seeing that they have a long-term valuable customer in this community. And it goes way beyond just making your logo look like a rainbow, right? It goes again into the ethos of who you are as a company. And that can look a million different ways, right? So every June, we start to see the Rainbow Pride packaging, right? And this is an economic opportunity. It increases the goodwill of the company. But again, because profit is the main goal, it casts this big wide net, right? And so we see rainbow on everything, or we see, their variation of what a rainbow would be. Skittles, for example, is my favorite of all of these because they actually sacrificed their brand image for this cause, right? So Skittles, if you're familiar with that candy, their entire idea is taste the rainbow. And for Pride Month, their packaging was all white and gray because, according to them, only one rainbow matters during Pride. So that to me is a great example of a company sort of taking a really out of the box approach as to how to approach Pride. Then we see a brand like IKEA. Everybody knows those, of course, the IKEA shopping bags, right? And IKEA was really progressive. They've been including gay couples in their ads since 1994, right? So this is not a new venture for IKEA. And every Pride, they take their iconic blue and yellow bags and they create their rainbow bags. 100% of those profits always go to the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, which is a program for children and youth and queer families. And in addition, every IKEA location worldwide flies a pride flag in addition to their IKEA flag around the world during June. We move on over to a lot of beauty brands like to participate in Pride, right? Kiehl's is one of them. They celebrate with philanthropic partnerships. They donated $100,000 to the Trevor Project, which is the largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people and youth. Harry's, in addition to giving 100% of their profits from their Pride sets, also have donated $200,000 to the Trevor Project as well. So it's a big time for philanthropy. I feel like the only other time of year that we see this kind of really big monetary shift into philanthropical efforts is during the holiday season when people are a lot, it's the season of giving, right? But in June, it's the season of giving for queer causes. Let's talk about platform Pride. So when I said Pride looked very different this year, most of us didn't go out and, march. Most of us didn't have parades because of COVID and because of safety measures wanting to shelter in place. But what we did see a plethora of was our platforms. Now, platforms every year, they are giving us this sort of rainbow moment during June, but particularly this year, everywhere I looked, there were options for LGBTQ community and outreach, and that is primarily, we get most of that from our streaming services, right? And This year they actually did a poll, and the total number of LGBTQ prominent characters and content on Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus have doubled over the past few years, right? All three of all the platforms, Netflix is considered the most inclusive with their content. And not only do these stories, explore rich lives and identities of queer people, but they move the needle culturally, right? They also pay off in ratings, right? Shows like Will and Grace and Pose, Queer Eye, The Politician, they attract millions of viewers every week, millions of binge watchers, and they demonstrate that audiences are really hungry for these perspectives and these new stories. And the amplification of LGBTQ voices in the long run is very, very profitable. So we see some more platform pride now from our social media platforms. So from not only our media like our Hulu and our Netflix and Disney Plus and all of these, but we also see it from YouTube, right? Their hashtag Proud to Be campaign um, was essentially featured videos of creatives from YouTubers and bloggers featuring Pride history, mental health help and initiatives, and Pride tips and parades, makeup bloggers, all of the sort of like it was all pooled into this one hashtag where you could find all of this content. And then Facebook doubled down on its rainbow frames and filters. I think the social media platforms are keenly aware that everyone is living on their phone right now. They're getting all of their information from Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We're starting to pull away from the news as a reliable source and really sticking to these devices that we carry around with us every day. So these social media platforms obviously know that, and know that because we're not out and about right now because of COVID, they're doubling down on their filters, and that you can have your own parade right in your own home, right? You can have your own parade and your own filter right here. Whoops, skipped Instagram. Instagram added new rainbow rings for users and their pride hashtag, of course. Instagram's probably the biggest platform of all of our social media platforms, and because they're visual, right, you're doing the heavy lifting visually. So they're including things like hashtag pride in the rainbow color, giving you all kinds of emojis and GIFs that you can use. And they do also, Instagram donates to the HRC, to GLAAD, and to the Trevor Project. Levi's and Snapchat decided to, for Pride, collaborate. This was actually a collaboration from last year's Pride, but through the end of June, Snapchat you could unlock a special Pride lens, and you could have scanned the QR code in Levi's stores across the nation. And then once you unlocked that, the lens used augmented reality to create this personalized, sort of seamless brand experience, both in store and on social media. Over at Google created a living monument, this AR living monument. It was an interactive digital monument dedicated to documenting the past 50 years of queer and trans history, as well as archiving current stories. So if you were physically in New York City in front of the Stonewall Inn, the project was called Stonewall Forever. They used an augmented reality experience to bring these monuments to life, like Christopher Park and the Stonewall Inn, and you could step into these living monuments dedicated to, queer joy and life and love and resistance. It was a community generated digital hub is what they called this experience, and it included contributions from activists and from celebrities alike. So not only could you be in a space and learn a story, it created this idea of a living monument, right? And being able to learn history from activists and the people who were actually there. Jumping forward, so let's take a look at some brands that celebrated Pride currently this year and last year for the Stonewall 50th year anniversary. And this goes again back to sort of being a good ally, right? Not every brand on this list is a queer-led brand, but they absolutely do their part, both in terms of marketing and financially supporting the LGBTQ community. The first of them is a space that exists outside of June, 365 days a year, right? So, this is the Fluid Project. They are in Soho in New York City. And if you are not familiar with the Fluid Project, they are sort of this really big disruptor in the industry. And it's interesting because retail is this incredibly gender delineated space, right? For proof of that, all you have to do is look at the fashion calendar, right? It's broken up into menswear, into women's wear, into these distinct categories. And even brick and mortar stores are almost always organized by gender, right? 56% of Generation Z consumers already shop outside of their assigned gender, ignoring clothing labels and categorizing themselves into a sort of cross gender or genderless, right? And gender neutral clothing is picking up momentum as it gains this sort of space in the fashion industry. By and large, we're seeing a very big push toward androgyny in the sector, and we're starting to see a big genderless apparel spike in children's wear, right? So we're seeing a range of retailers introduce gender-free kids clothes to appeal to parents who are sort of anxious about imposing potential regressive gender norms on their children through limited clothing choices, right? So remember last week when I talked about the color pink and this idea of pink for girls and blue for boys, right? We're breaking away from that. And the Fluid Project is this new gender neutral retail space and community, and it totally breaks the idea of traditional binary, right? So not only is this a store and a space that sells gender neutral clothing, but they seek to sort of guarantee that the clothing comes from designers who support gender-free clothing missions, and that the store's original clothing, it only makes up 50% of their inventory, right? The rest is made by designers that align with the company's mission and their concept. They don't buy vintage, they don't buy wholesale. So they're really breaking down a lot of barriers into what we consider traditional retail. And like I said, they're this disruptor in the industry, and it's really fascinating to go into this space. They also have a community space in the back, which can be rented out for all kinds of events. It is free and open to the public. Saks Fifth Avenue celebrating the Stonewall Inn. So they collaborated with, or Stonewall 50, they collaborated with the Stonewall Inn Gives Back initiative, the SIGBI, and they support LGBTQ community with profits from their capsule collections, right? Their capsule collections included designers like Balmain and Stella McCartney, Proenza Schuyler, Pavel Garoon, Alison Olivia, Christian Louboutin, right? Saks donated 30% of sales, which was a minimum they were going to meet, of $100,000 to the SIGBI. And funds support awareness campaigns, educational programming, right? What I love the most about these windows, though, is that while all of that is true, right? That was the function. That is how Saks gave back. What I loved about the space, having seen it, walked past it, was nothing for the most part in the windows was actually for sale. This was a beautiful moment that was completely lent to education and to history. A couple of the windows had the books that you see in the windows for sale, but for the most part, it was all about imagery and all about verbiage of like taking a stroll through a museum, right? So that was very important to them to put that forward. Once you got into the store, of course, you could purchase for the capsule collection, but they could have just as easily featured the clothing, but they opted instead to take a more sort of educational and reverent approach, which I really appreciated. I loved this exhibition. MAC Cosmetics. MAC Cosmetics has long been a huge brand activist for AIDS and HIV awareness. They're owned by Estee Lauder, and their Viva Glam campaign has been the most profitable for their sort of charity arm, right? To date, the Viva Glam has raised more than $500 million for queer causes, and they take it a step further, right? We talked about this when I just talked about drag culture, this idea of makeup and beauty influencers, right? They really understand their audience, and MAC understands that makeup is for everyone. It's not a gendered thing. It's for anyone who wants to wear it. And just this past year, MAC actually produced a documentary called More Than Tea, which was a spotlight for the lives of 7 trans people from diverse backgrounds, and it celebrated them without putting them under this cisgender microscope, right? So they very much believe in, they have a million different campaigns, not just the Viva Glam, but Magnificent Me, right, that celebrates LGBTQ culture. Paul Smith. So, this is another store that we just spoke about during our pink chat last week, but it's gotten a makeover. So, that beautiful Pepto Bismol Barbie pink building for Pride got their rainbow makeover. And this was a collaboration with Instagram. It was a takeover. So, their big wall on the left, where everyone loves to take pictures, now turned into this huge rainbow facade for Instagram. That hashtag generated a ton of likes, and Instagram and Paul Smith both matched for every hashtag a donation to the Trevor Project. Macy's Pride and Joy. So, in a series under the banner of Pride and Joy, their Pride and Joy initiative, Macy's released this 3-piece capsule collection of merchandise with a portion of the proceeds going to the Trevor Project. And a lot of that Pride themed merchandise that included jewelry, shoes, home goods from brands like Kenneth Cole, Levi's, DKNY, Polo, Ralph Lauren, Adidas, Calvin Klein, Michael Kors, all these brands that already have LGBTQ initiatives built into them. The hashtag My Calvins campaign from Calvin Klein. So Calvin Klein is consistently ranked amongst one of the most LGBT friendly brands year after year. And they started this campaign in 2018. Their Pride campaign features their CK in their classic CK in a rainbow logo on t-shirts, and all of their apparel that they sell supports charity for the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. And this company, Calvin Klein has previously come under fire, particularly in Russia, for their depiction of same-sex couples, right? Calvin Klein has always been pushing the envelope of otherness and of androgyny. And in Russia, they were actually considered breaking the gay propaganda laws. So they're very much, protesting in their own way by just existing in some of these spaces where people are still being persecuted. Bloomingdale's debuted this rendition of the carousel, their Bloomingdale's carousel. It was Pride for All. The carousel was a rotating pop-up shop which was driven by culturally relevant events with merchandise and hand-selected by guest curators, and it brought to life, they had all kinds of activations and events for this. They also partnered with the editor-in-chief of Out magazine, at the time was Philip Picardi, to curate an assortment of products to capture the sort of spirit and the history of Pride. So it was important for them to not necessarily just be covered in rainbows, but to be very thoughtful with how they displayed and showcased and used product. So Banana Republic and Gap, part of the same company, right? For Banana Republic, for the 5th year in a row, they continue their partnership with the United Nations Foundation in support of UN Free and Equal campaign for LGBTQ equality. Banana Republic has donated $60,000 to the organization, and Gap has the hashtag Wear Your Pride campaign, which focused on gear, which was gay employees, allies, and resources. And as part of the campaign, 30% of the net sales from Gap's brand's Pride's t-shirts was donated directly to the UN Foundation to benefit Free and Equal. Levi's. So Levi's is a brand that is always, I feel like anytime there's anything LGBTQ related, they're there. They're always, they're like MAC in that way. They're very much on the forefront of fighting for equal rights, and aren't afraid to, stick their necks out and have very strong opinions when it comes to this. And this collection was designed to raise awareness about the stigma and serves as a reminder to stand up for equality. 100% of these proceeds were donated to support the Harvey Milk Foundation and the Stonewall Community Foundation. Armani Exchange, this was, showing their pride colors, of course, making their beautiful store, which is usually this very Armani gray, right? Very kind of neutral, and showcasing their rainbow pride. For Ann Taylor, during the month of June, Ann Taylor, which includes Ann Taylor Loft, Lou and Gray, Lane Bryant, and all of their Justice brands, offered exclusive merchandise with a portion of the proceeds going to support the GLSEN, which is, again, a national organization for education working to create safe and inclusive schools for queer youth. Over at Express, they partnered up with GLAAD and Out magazine, and Express launched its Love Unites campaign to pay tribute to not only Pride Month, but to empower the queer community. And it was led also by Out editor-in-chief Philip Picardi's, very busy during June, and also the writer and transgender activist Raquel Willis, and writer and editor Coco Romack, who are all featured in the window here. And for every piece that was sold through, or is sold through July 15th of this month, Express will donate 25% of the net income to GLAAD, with a minimum donation of $100,000. For Theory, on the next slide to the right, they established their Theory for Good because they believe that the fashion industry must focus on the future in order to evolve, right? And that means using their platform to educate and empower, which is what we want from all brands, right? We want everyone to use their platforms to educate and to empower and to create spaces that are safe for every community. And during Pride Month, which was marked by the sort of COVID and social unrest, in a statement they said, "We believe it is more critical than ever to support these important communities and to be agents of change." American Eagle Outfitters. American Eagle Outfitters is really interesting because they've had this cultural shift over the past 5 years, and it's absolutely working for them, right? American Eagle Outfitters launched their Pride collection, and 100% of all of the sales went to the It Gets Better project. But they've struck this chord with consumers who value social responsibility and body positivity and queer inclusion and community, right? They did it with Aerie, with their Aerie Real campaign with body positivity, and no longer airbrushing any of their campaigns. And now they're doing it with the queer community and launching Aerie States, which is their mission to empower people to be their natural selves. This is led by Samira Wiley. You can see some of those brand ambassadors and representatives on the right giving a chat on all of that. So I love when a company not only creates something and donates a lot of money, but also really builds initiatives inwardly and culturally that they can showcase to their consumers and that can educate people. H&M. So H&M has launched their very first Pride collection featuring Kim Petras, Sean Russell, and Aja. It's their Pride and Loud campaign, and this is a big deal because this is the first time that H&M has ever had a Pride themed capsule collection. So they're making history, and they acknowledge that in a very, very big way, and they went really big, right? This is an international campaign for them, and it is done quite well. It's in collaboration with Out magazine. And the campaign featured all of these sort of queer influencers throughout all different kinds of spaces, right? Gus Kentworthy, who is a Olympic freestyle skier, again, Kim Petras, Gabrielle Richardson, right? Aja, and Sean Ross. Moving on to Kate Spade. This was just in time. This was actually a project that they led with just this past month. So giving us that classic rainbow for Pride, and also their Pride Rainbow Shop t-shirts, totes, all of those pieces. $25,000 on behalf of Kate Spade was donated to the Trevor Project. And all of the profits from all of those pieces, for the Rainbow Shop, were also donated to the Trevor Project. And then we round out and finish out with Michael Kors. So for Michael Kors, they used their rainbow capsule collection with the use of their hashtag MGGo, which was their Pride hashtag, and all of the proceeds for this Pride collection also went to the Trevor Project. So I mean, there's a million different charities, but it's fascinating to see this time of year just who aligns with who, right? And that does it for Pride 2020. If anyone has any questions, we can go ahead and start taking those. Let me fast forward, rewind back rather. There we go. So, in the meantime, as we are waiting for some questions, this Thursday, WindowsWear Live will be featuring Caesar Gavrivria. He is the visual merchandising and experience artist at Diane von Furstenberg at DVF. So if you are around this Thursday at 3 p.m., please join us for a talk with Caesar from DVF. It's going to be fantastic. And next Tuesday, we are going to be taking a look at, let me actually see that. I'll get back to you on that. But let's see if we have any questions as of now. Perfect. What is one of my favorite personal brands that supports inclusivity, and how do they do it? That's a great question. I think one of my favorite brands is actually Chromat, primarily because they're based out of New York and Miami. I'm from Miami, but I love to see of all women-led brands and queer-led brands and brands that really understand that it's not just about June. It's about 365 days a year, and really supporting causes that align with their mission statements, and building for people of color and queer people and women, and size inclusivity is very important to me. So I love a brand like that. I think they're edgy, they're really cool. I I know who they are, right? It's built into the sort of DNA of their brand. So I think for me, them, yeah, I think they're, and I think just Becca Tran is just really cool. Does anybody have a particular brand that they feel like does this very well? All right, great question. All right, we have a question here. So let's see. Lovely presentation. Thank you. I have the impression that brands are almost forced to dress their windows with the rainbow during Pride Month, as everyone does it. I cannot really imagine a brand that refuses to adapt itself among all others. What is your view on this? Right. So we call this pink washing, right? This idea that you're just throwing a rainbow up because everyone else is doing it, right? Again, that goes back to performative allyship, right? And we're steering away from that. But to be honest, there are a ton of brands that I did not mention today. In fact, most of our big heavy hitters were not mentioned today, right? Like some of the bigger luxury houses that we think of when we think of luxury fashion, didn't really sort of push the envelope when it came to Pride Month, right? They don't really acquiesce to the idea of the rainbow flag or the trans flag. So, yeah, you have to be weary of this idea of pink washing, right? People chasing the quote unquote pink dollar or the queer dollar, right? But I think by and large, if a brand is respectfully and smartly doing their research and donating to causes that they align with, um, and having particular capsule collections for June, it's no different than a brand having a capsule collection in October for breast cancer awareness, right? Or having a special collection for the holiday season, right? It's all equally just as profitable. But yeah, I mean, that brings up a good point. Are they forced to do it? No, because definitely there are a ton of brands that don't. But I think if they do it, it's because it's something that they really align with, right? Because if not, it's sad, but it can still be a polarizing thing. There are still people out there that would see a rainbow window and maybe not be apt to shop there. So it is still a risk. And oftentimes it pays off, but sometimes it doesn't. From Eric, have you seen the use of any gender neutral mannequins? Are they effective? Yeah, I think by the very definition, like a mannequin is gender neutral. I don't really assign uh gender to a mannequin. I think it's the garments that are put on the mannequin that are that make it gender coded, right? Now there of course are obviously the caveat to that, I guess, Eric, is that yes, of course, there are specific mannequins that are designed to be male or female. And then there's abstract mannequins that are very androgynous or completely genderless, right? So we're seeing a lot of that. I think that that's effective. Absolutely. I think you could see it at Fluid Project, but you also see it at department stores, especially in like teen sections that are geared toward like millennials and Gen Z. You start to see a lot more gender neutrality in the presentation of the mannequin, in that it could be in the women's section, but it's very presented very neutral and very androgynous. So um, I think that's effective, but I feel like mannequins, until if you're doing the traditional sort of like what Chanel does with the beautiful makeup and all of the synthetic eyelashes and the wigs, that's very sort of gender normative. But I think by and large, like gender neutral mannequins just make sense, right? Because you can keep them gender neutral, or you can put menswear or women's wear on them, add accessories, and then poof, you've got magically a mannequin that is no longer gender neutral. As long as they're selling, right? As long as they're doing their job as the silent salesperson, I don't think I think it can be effective. Thank you. You're welcome for your response. All right, so I think what are your thoughts, Eric? I mean, you're always looking at the retail space. What are your thoughts on gender neutral mannequins? I'm going to put you on the spot. Raul, I personally love Kleinfeld. Being a retail store that only sells to women, they always support and even do windows for Pride Month, although they don't necessarily sell tuxedos or anything other than dresses. Yeah, Kleinfeld is great. I mean, exactly like Kleinfeld when they did those two grooms together, right? That's very subversive for them, right? Kleinfeld is known for say yes to the dress, right? Kleinfeld is by and large a very stereotypically feminine and effeminate space because you're dealing with bridal, right? But quite frankly, women get married to other women all the time. So, marriage is a queer space as well, right? But I agree with you. I love that they make pride windows all the time. With male mannequins, even though that is not necessarily doesn't necessarily align with their client, right? So it's a very smart way to
to showcase, you know, outside of the box thinking when what you're selling is wedding dresses. Yeah, they do a really good job. In addition to, their team is fantastic, and they always build really innovative windows. I've never seen a bridal window as innovative as I do over at Kleinfeld. I think they do a beautiful job. All right, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for participating. As always, I will see you next Tuesday at 3 p.m. And this Thursday, again, we have a representative from Diane von Furstenberg, DVF, showcasing their fantastic projects. So please join us on Thursday at 3 p.m. and I will see you next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Have a great week.